Is she coming back?
She
looks like her stuff is here, but
should
I tell them to come out?
No, she's not in there. We have quorum.
Continue on.
All right, everybody. We're going to finish and wrap this up rather quickly, as stated on the work session agenda. Any board members who are considering amendments to next Thursday's school board meeting on the student rights and responsibilities, we would like to have you share those with your colleagues at this time. Again, the deadline to submit the official language is going to be on Friday, June 20th at close of business?
4 p.m.
4 p.m. So at this point, I would like to see if there is anyone who wants to volunteer. Mr. Moon, you are first.
Yeah, Dr. Dockery and I had this conversation just a few days ago and asked Dr. Dockery for assistance in crafting, potentially. I haven't decided whether I want to submit this as an amendment or just as a request for information. But I'm going to decide that, by, I guess, deadline 4 o'clock this Friday. That has to do with a so-called Moon Amendment, named after the guy named Moon. That I remember hearing from earlier discussion at a work session about a number of schools or a number of students who had a benefit of that Moon Amendment. And Dr. Dockery told me a few days ago that it was about 4.
Although actually after we talked, I went back and we don't have an exact way to confirm. We would need a better collection. But we do know our out-of-school support people supported 20 students who were back in school while their appeal was going on. So we think that it was closer to 20.
I feel much better if it's 20, but I just wanted to see whether we could, track the number in the future years, so that whether that Moon Amendment that the board passed is actually providing the benefit as it was intended to provide. So I might just send in as request for the information or as a follow-up motion. I will decide that by Friday.
Thank you, Chairman Moon. Anyone else? Well, Ms. Schultz is away from the table, so I'll share some of my thinking right now, and she may come back in because both she and I had a very productive conversation with Dr. Dockery last week. And like Chairman Moon, the two of us were talking about perhaps a follow-on motion for a request for data collection with the support of Dr. Garza and Dr. Dockery. We'll work on that language with them. But the goal being that as we move forward as a system, our ability to sort of track the offenses and then what's the actual disposition to those offenses would be very helpful to us, I think, as both a board and as a system. And Dr. Dockery, I was going to invite you to maybe elaborate a little bit on what I was saying, because you might be far more eloquent.
Well, I don't know about eloquent, but I think it's the right pathway to go down in terms of the changes that we're making and understanding their impact. We do anticipate, and we've been working with Dan on this. He's just had a little bit too much on his plate for a few weeks, but we have been talking about with a strategy, you need to have collection of data so you can see what the outcome was. We have had certain data points that we've looked at, like the reduction of suspension. However, we'll need new ones based on the new resources, and I think that the look at first-time use and first-time possession, those are things that we could track that would help us make decisions in the future.
And along that same line with Dr. Dockery, we are adding additional resource to our high schools to support this. So I think it's only appropriate for us to evaluate on an ongoing basis how effective it's been, because you're going to ask me next year, and I think appropriately so, how did that resource benefit our students in our system? And so we need to start measuring that from the beginning of school so that we can answer that question for you. So I think an overall, not just on certain things, I think it needs to be an overall evaluation of some of these changes.
And I have asked, Jill Jakulski is going to manage some of that, and I've asked her to work on a logic model that would give us some outcomes. We'll sit with Ricardo and look at that, because you don't want a bucket of data. You want certain data. And so I think that's what we would bring back to Dr. Garza to say, here's what we're looking at based on the resources, as well as some of the individual issues that we continue to be concerned about.
Thank you. And since this was something that Ms. Schultz and I had expressed concern as well as support for both of you, that's why we wanted to make it a follow-on motion, because we will be voting on this next week in front of the public. And even though it sounds like Dr. Dockery, you and Dr. Garza share our desire as well, the ability to just even put in maybe some very initial language that allows, obviously, the superintendent and you all to then refine that. But I think it'd be a great signal to our public that when we go to vote next week, that not only we are putting in what I think are some remarkable changes, but that as a system, moving forward, we want to also start capturing this good work. Ms. Schultz, you signaled you wanted to speak.
Right. I just want to, a lot of talk has been about this, and I really appreciate, Dan, the time that you spent kind of disaggregating the principals' positions on this when we met at the Ridge and walked through kind of where they stand and where we think we can go the greatest momentum. And I think the position that I've tried to take is we gain the most by getting the greatest number of people to move forward the smallest step. So while there may be goals down the road to do some other things, the greatest amount of buy-in that we can get with the greatest number of people is what will move us forward on this. And so in talking with you, Dr. Dockery, and listening to where you are, Dr. Garza, the hope was that by doing a follow-on motion instead of an amendment, is that we don't sort of impede the good work that's been done on the SR&R. And it may not be where some of us want it to wind up, but it's a show of faith that, listen, we've made very, very good progress. It's something that a vast majority of the principals are going to be, accepting of, and that the message is then in a follow-on motion, you know what, we're just going to be prudent and say publicly that we're going to watch, a couple of these things. And so we've asked Dr. Dockery to help craft the follow-on motion that you all see before next week.
One thing that I also had shared with Dr. Dockery is that, and you all have heard me ask for the data on Arlington and its recidivism rates and for their second chance program. And I want to thank both Dr. Garza and Dr. Dockery for getting that. And for my colleagues, I hope you saw it, because what was so incredibly compelling is through their second chance program, which includes possession or use of marijuana in that first offense, 95% of those students do not repeat offend. I mean, imagine the success of a program where 95% of them do not repeat offend. So I hope that as a system that will help us moving forward as we try to make our changes. And so initially that was my goal, was to put forward, amendment to change some language. But Ms. Schultz and Ms. Dr. Dockery, we talked about the fact that I share the desire that we embrace these positive changes, and sometimes you can't get everything you want in that first go around. So I didn't want to upset the principals, but I also feel really strongly that I think with Dr. Garza's direction as the superintendent and her designee, that we will hopefully still move in the right direction on that first offense.
Just to follow up, that I do believe if we could do our business rules and train on fidelity so that across the system we were responding in the same way, we will have made a lot of change that Dan and Karen worked very hard to get. So I do agree that it would be the right beginning. So,
Ms. Strauss?
Just in reporting and data collection, I know that we get updates regularly on student discipline issues, and there's also the state requirement, which is quite different and huge. Is there any movement at all in the state to change anything the way they collect data and those state reports? Because they're somewhat meaningless.
no, not in their, I mean, they have definite reporting categories.
Right.
And I haven't gotten anything different on that, although the laws of what we are required to do change, but it doesn't change ours.
Right, but that hasn't. I also noted on our Second Chance program, I believe it showed that we have a 97% success rate without recidivism. So it appears that
Our program. Well, and you
program
know,
is-
their program was modeled on our curriculum.
Ah, okay.
So what we're
they're
doing is
90
very similar, so we do have a very good. And Mr. Moon asked a good question as well, because we do serve more students this year, and that came because we opened the second location. And we also found that transportation in both Arlington and Fairfax are parent responsibility, but when principals approach us and say this is a barrier, but this is a good thing for the student, we've been finding some workarounds and support. So we have served more kids. It's not that the incidents are up, it's the kids being able to access the program are up.
Yeah.
Dr. Dockery, though, on that note, it's really important because I just heard what Ms. Strauss said. You're talking about apples and oranges. Arlington's recidivism rate, or, you know, the Arlington's non-recidivism rate is 97.5 for alcohol. For marijuana possession and use, which it's both, it's 95%. We don't allow the Second Chance program for use of marijuana in our program. So you can't say that we are better than they are, because you're talking about two different data points.
But I think we need to disaggregate that, because there are times where a principal requests for use, so it's not in lieu of, but they are accessing the program as well. So that would mean I just need to get you some data that's broken out differently.
Right, because Ms. Strauss was just talking about the 97.5%, but what offenses are you talking about?
That's okay.
Yeah.
We're just talking.
Mr. Paris?
Yeah, just one comment, because I think this is really important work, that I think one of the most important things we're going to do as a division is, leading up to the retreat, is looking at our balance assessment framework and how we can capture this, right? So principals have said all along, what's the scoreboard? So if you're clear about the outcomes that you want for kids, then how we as a system can line up to do it. So I was reading in this is a district management journal, and it was interesting. They talk about division-wide accountability systems. So one article talks about the number of outcome metrics across divisions. So this included San Francisco, Chicago Public Schools, D.C. Public Schools, Houston, Los Angeles, Montgomery County, Baltimore City, and New York City. That the average was 47 metric outcomes to drive their division work. And they were divided up across 4 domains: student outcomes, culture and climate, teaching and learning, management and organization. So this methodology, I think we're going to, I believe, go back to the balanced assessment framework, say, okay, can we design some high leverage outcomes that we want to drive the division work aligned with our objectives. So I think this discussion is a good one. But I think getting it in, you know, the long end of that was San Francisco was at 94, and the short end was Chicago Public Schools at 19. So as you delineate these discrete outcomes, in my mind, that's kind of a range that we ought to be thinking about, and the more clarity that we can give to schools about how to drive this work over the next 3 to 5 years, aligned with your objectives, the better this is going to be. And I think the fewer of those you have, the better off you're going to be.
Dr. Garza, did you want to add something?
No, but I will at the end. Is that all the amendments? We have a follow-up, maybe?
All right, last call, colleagues. Anything else to share? All right, then,
Okay,
Dr.
then
Garza, you're
I
on
do
deck.
want to very quickly say how much I appreciate the support of the changes around SR&R. I give Dan and Kim and their teams. It wasn't just them; their teams a lot of credit, and our principals. I think we made major headway with some really strong principals and all their colleagues because they went back and shared and got a lot of feedback. And I think we had an opportunity to really educate them, to have them start thinking differently. So I think it's very important and meaningful progress. I think it sets the stage for lots of good things ahead. So I'm very appreciative of the support, and I do think we're heading in the right direction. So thank you very much.
All right, I do not see any other hands. So at this point, Chairman Moon, I believe this work session is concluded for the SR&R amendments.
Thank you. I think we are all done, except that I need to make one announcement. I got a text message from our esteemed clerk of the board. She's doing very well on her break. But she is wondering whether any board member has sent in a evaluation of a superintendents. That since she has not received any single email from any board member, that she did want me to make that announcement, not to wait until June 23rd, the last minute. Okay, with that, this work session is adjourned.